Welcome back to Fast Attack, Slow Release. As always, I'm your host, Nate Brown. Thanks for joining me. Hope you're not too tired of me yet. I enjoy doing this. It's a good time. We're going to talk to Greg from Avid today. He's going to tell us a little bit about how Avid actually got into business, and what kind of prompted that whole bit of shenanigans. We're going to talk about how they kind of changed the way music's been recorded ever since. So we're on the phone with Greg Stryke Chin, Mr. Chin from Avid. You may know Avid as primarily as the makers of Pro Tools. How you doing, Greg?
I'm good, thanks, Nate. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So I kind of wanted to talk about like a little bit of the history of Avid and how you guys even got into business. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but you guys were started in 1983.
Yeah, 84. Yeah.
84. Okay. You started simply enough just making library expansions, but started simply enough making library expansions for the EMU drumulator. And I didn't even know, just like reading up on the history. I mean, I jumped in on Pro Tools 8. I definitely did not jump in 1984, 2 years before my birth. And so I didn't even really realize that, we were doing anything much more than typing real simple commands into computers in 1984. But, you started out finding ways to make the latest and greatest technology just kind of like working for us in a musical sense. So you start out in 1984 as Digidesign in conjunction with EMU. And, I mean, you're already developing Mac-based software with the whole point of making music more accessible and, able to be produced not in
a traditional sense, not in the analog realm.
So you're already making, in 1984, you're already starting to make computer-based software in conjunction with EMU, and already it just, the whole point, it seems, is that you're trying to make music easier to make and make the technology, a little bit more accessible and, able to be taken really anywhere. Is that?
Yeah, so actually the original idea that Peter and Evan had, so to kind of step back and it is kind of one of our main tenets, which is making things easier. You kind of mentioned that a couple of times, Nate, and that's really kind of where the birth of Digidrum is, then Digidesign, and Avid Audio. That's really where it started, was making things easier. So Peter and Evan were both computer science majors, engineers by nature and by trade, but they were musicians as well. And in the early '80s, synthesizers and drum machines were huge. I mean, I grew up in the '80s, and I'm a child of the '80s. I started collecting synthesizers and drum machines in the '80s as well. And the idea that there was a drum machine that came out from by the company EMU, the drumulator. And what was great about the drumulator was the sound banks were burned onto these chips. And while they weren't user replaceable, Evan and Peter found a way to be able to burn new samples onto chips, these kind of EEPROM, I think they were EEPROMs, and get them out.
Were they just kind of going rogue? Like, this wasn't a thing they were doing with EMU at this point? They just decided
No, this was not with EMU. This is something they were doing in their garage, or, at home. They were first doing it for themselves, and then they started selling them. So if I'm correct, EMU found out about it, and there was some collaboration, but it was really, most of it was really just them, when they became Digidrums, it was as a third party. So as they started selling these chips, the demand for the chips got pretty high, and they needed to figure out a way to be able to, get stuff done quicker. So they came up with the idea of, they needed to edit these samples quicker. So they figured out a way to be able to kind of, using a Mac, create a piece of software. What they needed was a visual waveform editor. to be able to edit the samples quickly and then save them so that they could then burn them on the chips. And that's really how things started. It was really out of, they say that necessity is the mother of invention, and they were really just trying to be more efficient. And that's what became, Sound Tools, and then all the way up to Pro Tools, was really just a waveform editor that they could visually see the waveform, so they could quickly go in and adjust the start time, the end time of the sample, that kind of thing, so that they could just really work quicker. And that's where it started. So the idea of making things easier is the main tenet.
Yeah, that's really cool, and it's such a, like, what is now a novel idea that, I mean, now is not so novel an idea. It's just a thing. You see it everywhere on CSI or whatever TV you watch. Whenever there's something involving a recorded sound, like, it's just seeing sound waves on a computer screen is so commonplace. But 1984, that's a really novel idea.
Yeah, sure.
So
it definitely wasn't the standard, for sure, not even close.
Yeah, absolutely. By 1997, your Pro Tools, and you're at a 24 track count. We're cruising along. We're at like 24-bit depth. We're basically, we're driving this train into, in a lot of ways, killing off a lot of old recording tech as anything now other than like mostly a nostalgia kind of thing. So you release your first bit of hardware in '89, which is a 16-bit audio interface. 97, that jumps to 24 tracks with 24-bit depth. And then in 1999, you release the Digio 1, which is like, everyone knows the Digio 1.
Yeah, Digio 1 was a game changer. That's really, when the company really started thinking about kind of getting the technology out to everyone. Anyone who wanted to create and have the most professional, the most sonically best sounding music or audio available at a lower cost. 001 just really changed the game for the company. Up until that point, everything that the company had done was really geared towards specifically a professional user in a studio setting. When Digio 1 was released, that really changed the game. We went Pro Tools LE. So that was our first, or really our second. We had tried this whole thing with Pro Tools Free, which didn't really, wasn't all that great. That's when I first started trying to use Pro Tools. I actually had a remix to do for Madonna. I had there were a lot of caveats and a lot of, things you had to kind of get through. But with LE, you had this hardware attached to it, and it worked beautifully. And it was a really great way to really allow, up and coming bedroom producers and kids and people who were interested in recording, who didn't, have a budget to go to a big studio with a big Pro Tools rig or even a big, analog console and tape machine, to be able to have access to this stuff on their computer. So that was, 001 was game changing.
Yeah, sure. That's everything. You hear so much now, big albums being produced in bedrooms. It's crazy how far you have driven, like, what can be accomplished by someone who's never been in a studio before.
Yeah, it's I find that actually that actual thing very interesting. In my family, I'm one of the only musicians. My brother-in-law is also a musician and a producer as well, and it's pretty funny. We both have studios, and it's pretty funny to have people come over and they're just blown away by the fact that you can do. There's still certainly a perception that a lot of music is still made in big studios, and that's great. I work in a few big studios, but the availability of what you have at your fingertips, really just in your laptop, and the software like Pro Tools, it's astounding to kind of, as you've been going, Nate, you've been kind of going back and talking through some of the history, and you're like, you got 24-bit, or you had 18 tracks and 24 tracks. Now it's just sky's the limit, and you couldn't even fathom that kind of accessibility in the palm of your hand just a few years ago.
Right.
So we're proud of that.
Yeah, it's incredible. And also going back, I mean, working like big studios are still like necessary and awesome, and like I'm not running at this with a chip on my shoulder. But it's also cool to think about. Your average user at home can be using basically the same tape machine now as Blackbird or Sunset Sound or whoever. Like all these legendary studios are using at least some of the same gear you are if you're on Pro Tools.
Yeah, sure. Again, I just find that to be amazing. I also find it interesting that as we talk about how amazing that is, you have a lot of the younger generation, younger kids, younger folks who this is now what they're this is where the bar is. There's an expectation from them that you've got everything at your fingertips. So that also helps push us as a company and other companies as well. Really take this, not just replace the idea of what a recording studio was or is, but really taking the next few steps into what comes next, and really kind of being very aggressive and looking at what the future is and what that means for music creation, post, audio and video for Avid. We do all of it. What that means for all of that in general. So I find the comparison between those of us who kind of grew up in the analog world and made the transition to the digital realm, and a lot of very young kids and younger younger citizens of the world who started here. You show them a 2-inch tape machine, they have no idea what that is. For all they think that's a nuclear device,
right?
To set something off. And I think that's really interesting. But it is, we're driven by both of those things as a company, and I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, and going back to the the new millennials creating music, they don't know anymore. It seems to me like they don't seem to know that a demo is supposed to sound bad. I remember, I mean, even early 2000s, it was, you set up a crummy little 2-track recorder in just the middle of the room and just play. And
yeah,
demos nowadays sound almost there at points,
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty crazy. I have a record label as well, and I get demos, and as a DJ, I get demos for folks will ask me to play their stuff, and they'll say the demo mix, not final, and I'm listening to the thing. I'm like, the sonic clarity on this thing is like so far ahead of anything that I have labeled as a demo, because I still as a songwriter, I'm still thinking about just getting the idea out, and then I'm not worried about the sonic fidelity of anything. I'm just really trying to get the ideas out. So I'm not I'm still in that kind of old way of doing things. But yeah, a lot of my students, I teach at Grammy Camp, when they're sending me demos, they're like, I haven't mixed it yet. And I'm like, well, this sounds pretty mixed.
You're right.
You might spend a half hour kind of tweaking it, but where's the demo? Like, I want to hear the demo with just the piano or a couple of synths and one drum machine with just doing 2 or 4 bars and no fills or anything. Let me hear that with nothing mixed. But yeah, I mean, it speaks to where we are, and what we have available to us.
Absolutely. So the other thing I wanted to kind of touch on with you, you guys are responsible for the very first control surface that I ever used, which is the C24.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I guess that's the I almost said predecessor. That's the next step in line from the Control 24, which again released by then Digidesign, game-changing piece of hardware. I don't remember another controller before that having things like motorized faders and assignable rotary knobs and the soft labeled LED scribble strip all in this one controller where now I can go back to mixing with my ears and not like looking at my EQ on the screen. And you guys are actually still kind of pushing that forward, and you've still got some cool stuff coming down the line as far as like hardware and how we actually mix and interact with our mix goes.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that, again, kind of going back to the original tenet of making things easier. One of the things really early on that even back in the 001 days, we knew that folks want, especially engineers, that they want a tactile experience to be able to get their hands on. This is what folks were used to touch the faders, touch, if you're doing something on the EQ, having those knobs to be able to turn and make the changes. There's a real relationship, between tactile touch and feel and music creation. So we realized pretty early on that was something that we wanted to do, and we wanted it to be tied directly into Pro Tools, where there was a really nice organic, one-to-one relationship. So we had products like Command 8, which is an 8 fader control surface, which is my first, dive into an Avid or a Digidesign control surface. We have the 003 control surface. Of course, we had Pro Control, which is our first foray into the professional control surface market. Then came Control 24, then C24. Obviously, then we had Icon, which was our flagship high-end, mixed control surface. We then acquired Euphonics back in 2010. S5 was really big, really successful, which eventually kind of combining S5 and some of the DNA of S5, System 5, and Icon became S6, which is really become the industry standard now for post and studio music studios for that for that control surface, that tactile feel directly tied into Pro Tools or any other Yukon enabled application. And then we wanted to make sure that we continue, again, the idea of really enabling not just the professional. I mean, the professional market is our professional customers. I mean, that's huge, and we want to make sure we serve them to our very best ability. But we want to be able to serve everyone, and that's really where the new control surfaces we've just announced, the S1 and the S4. That's where they kind of come into play. And I also think it's a really exciting time because we've been a little bit dormant, as far as kind of releasing hardware. So folks are going to start seeing a really big, dramatic shift into over the next couple of years and what we're going to be doing with hardware and software as well. But it's a really exciting time. And you mentioned C24. I still see a ton of those out in the field in different studios, and people still love using them. And they're great. I mean, they're great to this day. I mixed a few records on C24 and loved it. As we continue to move forward with what the platform, what the Pro Tools platform can do, we want to make sure that the control surfaces are able to handle all of that, and again, give that user that very organic feel. You mentioned just really being able to feel and mix with your ears, not your eyes so much. And that's it's very important to us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And the other thing too about these, the Control 24 and moving forward into the S1 is if you're used to the Control 24 and you're used to mixing with your hands on the Control 24, if you step into a place that's got an S1 or an S4 or an S6, you're not even going to get lost on it. The thing that astounds me about it, and even like Pro Tools throughout the years, is that you enhance the technology without making your users relearn everything. The workflow stays virtually the same on all of them, and that's, I think, a lot harder to do than people let on. And you guys have done that really, really well.
I appreciate you saying that. I got to think that you're actually a really great evangelist for Avid. I think you hit the nail on the head. One of the things that we've had to kind of contend with, and I'm always fully transparent and open and honest. We've dealt with a lot of, a decent amount of backlash for, the perception of certain pockets in time where it seems that we've been slow to react on things. But I think a lot of, one of the things that gets lost on some of those users is the fact that we've got a large swath of users to contend with. You look at a lot of our, or if you want to call it competition, we call them friendly rivals, who make great products as well, but a lot of them are dealing with one or two specific, components of users. We're dealing with all of it. So we're not just dealing with musicians. We're dealing with, obviously, we're dealing with engineers. We're dealing with post houses. We're dealing with music. We're dealing with all of it, enterprise all the way down to individual user. And we've got this legacy of products that people become very attached to and they've been using for a very long time. For them to make a change, maybe they've got to make a change because that technology is either kind of gone on, and they've got to update, they've got to stay current, and their new features that they want to use. We want to make sure, we have to ensure, it's very important to us that those users who have been here for a long time, that have a certain muscle memory on a control surface, that when they get on a new control surface, that, like you said, we don't want them to feel lost. We want them to be able to feel and access that muscle memory and kind of be able to kind of call on that to do what they've been doing for a long time. And at the same time, we want to enable them to be able to use all the new functionality, all the new features, all the new workflows in the new stuff, and feel inspired by that. So that is not an easy thing to do. If we were just looking at preserving legacy and preserving history, okay, we'd probably be able to cut down development by half. If we were just looking at moving forward and cutting off all of our legacy, workflows and features and stuff, again, we'd be able to release things and get stuff out there a lot quicker. But because we have the entire breadth of our users to contend with and deal with, I shouldn't say contend. Contend sounds like it's negative, but I mean, there's that. We love all of our users. We've got a lot of folks to take care of, and we take all of that seriously. So it's a lot of heavy lifting that goes into it. I can assure you that there's a lot of discussion. When we get to the table and kind of talk about roadmap, roadmap. Everyone thinks roadmap is just forward thinking, and usually that's the case. For us, it's forward thinking and preservation, but not even just preservation. How do we take some of that historical workflows, features and things of that nature, and make them better if possible? So it's a huge undertaking, and we take it really seriously. And we know that it takes quite a bit of time to get there. We continue to ask for everyone's patience, as it pertains to releases and things, because again, we want to make sure that everybody's served. We don't always get it fully right, but it's a work in process, and it takes time.
Yeah. And I'm of the camp that I would rather wait and have the kinks ironed out ahead of time rather than, submit a report, like an error report when anything crashes back to the company. I mean, I've never looked at it at taking your time on releases as a disservice, and not just your time as an Avid time, just in general. And I think taking your time to get it right is an admirable thing. And if you have to wait a minute to turn a profit to turn out a good, reliable product instead, then please do that.
Yeah, appreciate you saying that. I mean, we also understand that the way business moves nowadays is certainly a lot quicker. But in my opinion, just because business moves a certain way, that I don't think that should dictate. And this is I'm speaking personally. I'm not speaking on behalf of Avid on this one necessarily, but I think you would find that certainly a lot of our team feels the same way. It really is about making sure we get it right. We do live definitely in a culture of just get it out. I mean, I'm a big video game player, and Xbox and PS4 and all of that, and just in my daily life, just there's so much beta like released products, they're really beta, and I think we have to really kind of pivot away from that. I think that's doing a disservice. Customers buy something, whether it's a widget, whether it's a box, whether it's a piece of software or whatever, and there's an expectation. There always has been an expectation and always will be an expectation that you're going to open this thing up, set it up, and it's going to work as advertised or as it should. This whole idea of customers being paid beta testers, meaning they're paying to be a beta tester. To me, that's really doing a disservice to the customer and doing a disservice, well, to everyone. So I truly hope that the trend pivots away from that and kind of settles back down into a cadence of nothing released before its time, and I think everybody will be okay with that. But I think we have a responsibility. Companies, as a company, as a technology company, or any company really, has the responsibility to kind of reconsider the cadence of business and how things are released. And I think speaking for Avid, again, I think that's something that we do absolutely consider, which is why I think the perception at times is that we take quite a bit of time on certain releases or certain things, but that's really what it comes down to, is trying to get it right before we put it out.
Awesome. Well, Greg, I won't take up too much more of your time. I really appreciate you talking to us today. It's always nice to hear teasers and kind of an idea for what to expect from people. So it's been great talking to you. I would love to pick your brain about some other stuff at a later time.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me, Nate. And I'm at your service. And thank you for everything that you're doing and getting information out to the people. So really appreciate you and what you're doing. And always here at your service. Hit me up anytime.
Right on, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Avid. To learn more about Pro Tools or any of the other awesome products that Avid distributes, you can visit them at www.avid.com. Make sure to keep an eye out for pending releases on hardware and fun stuff next year. I think next year. Greg didn't actually tell us. Or maybe I'm just bad at listening. If you want to join in the show with questions, comments, feel free to email me, nate@performanceaudio.com. If you want to check out the S1, S2, or S6, visit us at www.performanceaudio.com. If you want to hear old episodes where I talk with industry professionals, local producers, what have you, you can visit us at www.podcast.performanceaudio.com. Talk to you next time.